Hi everybody, this is German Grandmaster Georg Meier, and today we are going to cover the main line of the Catalan opening. So we're going to be talking about Black's toughest defensive setup, and we will look at a positional masterclass by none other than the Armenian Grandmaster Levon Aronian, who shows a lot of subtle ideas to put long-term pressure on Black's position. The usual first moves. We reached the starting position of our beloved Catalan, and today we are going to have a close look at the main line. And what I mean by the main line is this position after d takes c4. And in earlier videos, I was always talking about the important decision: does Black give up the center, or does he try to keep his central presence, meaning the pawn on d5, fortifying it, for example, with c6? And here is a very special circumstance in terms of Black giving up the center, but in a moment where White has to make a real concession to regain this pawn. And to illustrate this point, if White could play knight bd2, just capture on c4, he would have a great position and would have made no sense for Black to give up his central presence. But here there's just b7, b5, defending the pawn, and there is no way to use the exposed long diagonal, because after knight e5, it's just blocked by knight d5. Then another very attractive way to try to regain the pawn would be playing knight e5. But here, knight c6 is the rejoinder, and there are a lot of games where White gives up this bishop, which is of course a concession in a way, and leading to positions like these, where in general Black manages to drum up enough counterplay based on the fact that the White king is eternally exposed by not having the g2 bishop anymore. So this leads to the main move here, queen c2. And here White does regain the pawn on c4, but the concession is that we do not want to bring our queen out so early. It will be, first of all, taking two moves to get to c4, but also kind of exposed and subject to an expansion of Black on the queen side. So Black plays a6, and here there are two moves. In this video we will talk about queen takes c4, and in the next video I will cover an important line of the a4. So after queen c4, Black plays b5 with tempo, drives back the queen, and manages to solve one key problem in the Catalan. It's the development of this queenside bishop. So does this mean that Black is going to solve all his problems? We are going to see that b7, b5 has weakened squares on the c-file for the rest of the game. And when White manages to show that those are real weaknesses, usually he's the one who dictates what happens in the game. So let's see what Aronian did. He played bishop d2. Other worthwhile moves are bishop g5 or bishop f4. As usual, in the main line of any big opening, there's plenty of choices for both sides. So anyone who wants to mix it up from one game to another will find plenty of avenues to do that. So Aronian went with bishop d2. The idea is to look at the a5 square from where he can put pressure on c7, and ultimately there's an issue also with the queen on d8. And back when this game was played, this move rook a7 was all the rage. Elegant way of defending the c7 pawn with the rook there. And this bishop move to e4 would normally be answered by queen d1. This is why White just put the rook on c1, to kind of be able to bring back queen home and have his rooks connected. But in this very moment, Black could take on f3, take on d4, and there's no way to use this skewer because there's just queen d1 in between. So that means that after bishop b4, White has to go queen b3. Black goes knight c6, attacking on d4, e3 is forced, queen a8. We see Black suddenly puts a lot of pressure on this long diagonal. But on the other hand, the knight on c6 is still misplaced. You will have to move again to create a possibility for black to get rid of the weak c-pawn by c7, c5. So yeah, black has kind of won a few tempos, but when he moves the c6 knight, then white will have time to catch up. So right now there's a threat of knight takes d4 using this dominance on the long diagonal. Therefore, white was smart in playing queen d1, defending on f3. And here, as mentioned before, black temporarily retreats and says, I'm very happy with having neutralized g2 bishop, and soon I will just play c5 and all opening problems will be solved. We will see it's not that easy. White goes bishop a5, taking on c7, bishop d6. And here, an incredibly subtle move is played, and it's the strongest in the position. White goes a3. And at first sight, one might want to play, for instance, knight c3. But then after a move like bishop b7, it becomes clear that the bishop is stranded on a5 and could be embarrassed by a knight returning to c6. So the knight should not go to c3. On the other hand, if the knight goes to d2, there's again an issue with bishop on a5, because there's a threat of knight c6, bishop drop back to c3, and then b4 would win a whole piece. So in light of all this, it turns out that a3 is a very useful move, making sure that nothing bad happens to the bishop on a5, and also setting up the idea of sealing the queen side with b2, b4. So black goes knight bd7, now kind of hinting at the possibility of also going e5, but first of all, white develops with tempo, since this bishop on e4 needs to be kept in the game. And now queen f1. Just making sure that after e5, white can capture as many times as he wants, since g2 will be defended. So if black were to play e5, takes, and here just rook c2, nicely defending b2, and making sure that there are big problems to come for the c-pawn after white is doubling down. But anyways, black wanted to play c5, getting rid of this backward pawn. And now we see how important it was to play rook fc1, get the queen back. The rooks are connected and can just be doubled on the c file now. And think back about what I said in the beginning. With move b7, b5, weaknesses were left on the c file. And for example, the square c6 could be an entry point further down the progression of the game. So first of all, the bishop had to move. So there is an exchange. And now white goes about removing the strong bishop on d5, playing knight d4, and getting closer to invading black's position with perhaps a knight on c6. Therefore, black answers with knight e5, keeping an eye on the useful outpost on c4 and also defending c6. Exchange on d5, and now a very nice positional move by white. Like I just said, the knight is very well positioned on e5, both actively looking at c4, defensively at c6. So knight 4 to f3 to exchange this knight and not letting him jump to c4. And now we can see that the smoke is slowly clearing. A lot of pieces have been exchanged, but white is left with very strong control of the open c-file, and this square is already becoming more and more vulnerable. And with it, the whole queen side can come under attack. Black brings the passive rook from f8 into the game. And here, Aronian found another wonderful positional move. We are happy with placement of the rooks. Knight on f3 will eventually go to e5 or d4, but the queen is a bit shy on f1, and Here, white seizes an opportunity to centralize the queen. Queen d3, it's headed to the optimal square on e4, and black would play knight f6, then rook c6, queen b8, queen c2 would be a big improvement for white, eventually being able to play rook c7 or rook c8. And if black were to exchange queens, we see that the rook on b6 can't be kicked out, is keeping the queen side under fire, while white is ready to kick out the black rook. White can at any point play rook c2 to defend on b2, and then has knight d4, and the black rook would be completely out of squares. So black would be driven back, and finally white would just completely dominate on the queen side. Instead, black went knight e7. Knight is not well placed there, but at least keeps an eye on c6. Queen e4, rook d7. Now black, of course, has in mind to play rook d1 to ease the pressure by exchanging one pair of rooks, but sidesteps this with king g2. And here, black started to feel the pressure. There are already ideas with knight e5, queen f3, attacking f7. There is, of course, an eye on c6. Rook can at some point penetrate to c7. So black felt compelled to weaken his king side playing f7, f6. It's very often seen that when the defender is under pressure, he eventually starts making weakening moves. So in the short term, keep white's activity at bay, but when you start opening up your king, you will just produce problems for the future. And here's a very instructive moment. White plays h4. It's a typical idea once the f-pawn is moved, that like a dagger, we use the h-pawn to induce further weaknesses. If it gets to h6, it's usually collapsing the black structure. And if black himself plays h6, then we see that holes start to appear. And even more so when black plays e5, because there is also a hole on f5, and the knight could eventually be rerouted there. So with the pressure mounting, black offered the exchange of queens, and here's the only moment where Aronian did not play perfectly. Otherwise, this is just a model game in the Catalan. He could have taken the chance to exchange queens, and now that black rook for a moment is not controlling the d-file, white has time to reroute the knight to the juicy weak squares on the queen side. And from e4, it will also attack f6 in conjunction with h6 push. There are some problems there, and otherwise the whole queen side will be under pressure. And at any moment, there's also ideas with the rook going to c7, so the position becomes close to lost for black. The only way to fight on is to try to exchange pawns with b4, but after knight e4, it's a very difficult struggle ahead. Anyways, in the game, Aronian didn't want to exchange queens because he felt that black king is so weak that he should keep the queens on the board. In the practical game, he was proven right. Black didn't find the right way to coordinate in this position. I think black should play not king f7, which further exposed the king, but probably h6 and followed by king h8. But instead of the king f7, white just slowly improved his position, rook c5. Black again kind of crumbled under the pressure, played rook c8. And now with the knight leaving e7, queen f5 is very unpleasant. White managed to provoke g6, and now the h-file will eventually be opened, and the final onslaught is beginning. Queen g4, knight e7, opening the h-file, rook h1, and here after king g7, queen h3 would start a decisive attack, while after f5, rook h7, it was only a matter of moves until the white pieces managed to completely flush the black king out and decide the game. So the remaining moves were queen e4, and queen starts to penetrate. There was one repetition, And the final blow at this point was e4, queen e6, knight g5. And since queen f6 became unstoppable with decisive material gains on e7, black resigned. So this was a complex, long game. And I want to go back to what I said in the opening. The whole story was, can white make use of the weaknesses on the c-file? And very often in Catalan games, when the pawn structure is symmetrical, d and c pawns of both sides have been exchanged, we see this pawn formation with the pawn on b5, and control of the c-file is a crucial element of white's play. And here Aronian just kept the pressure up from the moment that he got to double the rooks, and eventually step by step increased his advantage until black collapsed. And I recommend anyone to go through this video and the game more than once, because there's so many subtle ideas to take in that it's really worthwhile to go over it slowly and try to kind of feel the coordination that Aronian was putting into place. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about the Catalan, check out what's coming next. In total, the series has 10 videos, and I hope a lot of interesting content for you.